You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 28th of February 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist. I'm Chris Cermak. Coming up.
Did I say that? I can't believe I said that. Next question.
After UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer yesterday, Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky is next in line for a fraught meeting with Donald Trump at the White House. We'll analyse the talks with a Ukrainian MP. From Ukraine to France, which is caught in a migration dispute with its former colony of Algeria. We'll also explore an interview with the administrator of the Panama Canal in Monocle's March magazine issue, hear about the first cargo-only bullet train in Japan, and after that...
We are continuing to learn, basically, that satirizing current American politics has become pretty much a matter of merely reciting what actually happens.
Andrew Mueller's What We Learned This Week. We'll also have a look at today's newspapers and get an update of trade and economy news. That's all up ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. North Korea's Kim Jong-un has ordered full nuclear readiness for the country after observing the test launch of a strategic cruise missile. China has vowed to take all necessary measures against tariffs to be imposed by the Trump administration next week, and a U.S. judge has temporarily halted the mass firing of federal workers by the Trump administration. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. But first... Later today, two leaders who have been at odds over the last few weeks will meet in Washington, D.C. Volodymyr Zelensky and Donald Trump have history dating all the way back to Trump's first administration, and the recent rhetoric stemming from the White House, not to mention recent meetings between the U.S. and Russia, will no doubt have Zelensky putting all of his diplomatic skills to the test to keep Washington on side. Well, I'm joined now by Ivanna Klympush-Tsintsadze, a Ukrainian politician, journalist, and former Deputy Prime Minister of European and Euro-Atlantic integration. Ivanna, great to have you on the show. Zelensky is in Washington, first of all, to sign a minerals deal. Tell us how big a deal that is.
Good morning. Thank you for having me, Chris. Well, I think that this is more like a memorandum of understanding, and this is... at least what we've seen in the media. The Ukrainian parliament was not consulted on preparation of that agreement, but I do not see something that President Zelensky has been mentioning as a major and important part for us, and I totally agree here with him, that it would contain some security guarantees. It doesn't even have a reference to the security agreement that was signed with the previous Biden administration of the United States, and I wonder how that is corresponding, to the reality. So I'm very cautious with regard to what it brings, and also I'm very cautious how that will be further playing out as it foresees the next step, the creation of the fund between the U.S. and Ukraine, where Ukraine is to be offering to the U.S. like 50% of all its proceeds from any of the natural resources. I'm worried about that.
Ivanna, I have to ask you, based on partly what you were saying there, Ukraine's been feeling throughout this in the last few weeks like maybe it doesn't have as much of a role to play with the US and Russia having discussions. Zelensky might have felt left out of that. How does that feel from your perspective if you're describing that as members of parliament, you're perhaps even further left out of everything?
I think it's absolutely bizarre that in few weeks, the whole world has moved from discussing, very clear picture of the aggressor state having invaded the sovereign state of Ukraine, violated the international law, and now we were discussing how to make sure to stop the aggressor and what are the instruments of pressure, of pushing against the aggressor and how to help the victim. But right now we are discussing what exactly the victim has to offer in order to have the right to fight, basically, and have the right to die. And I think I find it's very frustrating.
And Ivanna, Zelensky's meeting today comes after a meeting that Donald Trump held with Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, yesterday, which I suppose highlights this effort also by the Europeans to try and remain involved in this. Is that a message you expect Zelensky to be sending as well?
Yes, I very much hope so. And I think that and it's good that President Zelensky has been in coordination with President Macron, Prime Minister Starmer. I think incredibly important that, UK Prime Minister, other European leaders have stepped up in their readiness to act. And I think that this is important, that Ukraine is pushing its position, its understanding in coordination and in cooperation with the European countries. I think it's about our common defense and common security and common peaceful, hopefully, future.
And what have you made more generally, I guess, of Zelensky's diplomacy at this point, if I could ask? Because it is a challenging time for Ukraine, as you've been laying out there, in terms of making its case. This has shifted quite dramatically in the last few weeks. How do you expect Zelensky himself to try and shift his own tone in this meeting with Donald Trump? This has been a pretty challenging relationship.
I really would expect and would hope that President Zelensky gets his grip together and will be focusing exclusively not on the personal, exchange that has been also dominating the media and the news over the last couple of weeks, but would focus on the critical needs and interests of the country and the black and white picture that we are having on our soil with the Russian aggressive attack on Ukraine and Russian aggressive war on Ukraine. So I think keeping of that on that focus on that would be critical for President Zelensky, and not to respond to any, emotional or personal statements. That's what is required right now, and that requires a lot of calm, a lot of self-control, and a lot of clarity in the thinking when you are talking about the fate of your country. And I would hope that President Zelensky will deliver on that.
And when you mentioned the black and white picture in Ukraine, tell us more about that. What is the situation from your perspective on the ground at the moment? Because it might be easy to forget almost sometimes with all of this political wrangling that this conflict, this war is still continuing.
Yes, thank you for actually saying the war, because when I'm hearing from the US that it's conflict in Ukraine, I'm getting emotional as well. Well, every single night over the 3 last weeks, we have not had the possibility, I think, across the country to sleep because of the massive drone attacks across the country every single night for all this time. And also, Russians are pushing on the front line. Russians are pressing by new and new attacks. And that means that we do have to have the resources to A, protect ourselves, and B, to respond and push back on them. It's been hard. It's been hard on people. It's been hard and exhaustive on the Ukrainian population. But that, again, does not provide for the change in resolve of the Ukrainian people to make sure that they survive as a sovereign, independent, territorially integrated state that has the future and has the possibility to choose its future in the EU and with NATO as well.
Ivanna Klympush-Tsintsadze, Ukrainian MP, thank you very much for joining us. This is The Globalist. It is coming up on 8:10 in Algiers and Paris and 7:10 here in London. The issue of migration has dominated politicians' agendas in Europe and the United States for the past year or so, with much of the talk shifting from integration to repatriation, particularly after a spate of attacks in Germany in the last few months and this weekend in France. A knife attack by an Algerian who had been tapped for repatriation has sparked a row between France and Algeria. France's Prime Minister, François Bayrou, has demanded the former French colony take back deportees. Well, I'm joined now by Mary Fitzgerald, Monocle's North Africa correspondent based in Marseille. Mary, tell us about what sparked this over the weekend, first of all.
Well, I think it's important to start, yes, with this incident at the weekend in the city of Mulhouse, where basically an Algerian citizen, France had spent quite some time trying to deport this individual. He killed one person and injured three in a knife attack. This is the latest in a series of attacks and other incidents where basically the person responsible has been somebody who was designated for deportation, Algerian or other nationalities. And this is something that has gained a momentum in terms of the far right in France has pounced on this issue, basically saying that when these people stay in France, they present a danger to the public. So it's been whipped up a lot over the last couple of years, this question of what to do with people who have been designated for deportation yet still remain on French soil. However, it's also important to take a step back and look at the particularities of this in terms of the Franco-Algerian relationship, because there are other things, other dynamics at play here as well. Because Algerians in France have exceptions when it comes to emigrating to France because of the colonial history. France was the colonial power in Algeria. Algeria gained its independence in 1962 after a long and bloody independence war. Basically, Algerians have exceptions to immigration law here when it comes to moving to France. Over the last couple of years, for a number of reasons, the bilateral relationship has become particularly strained. And I was struck yesterday evening, Benjamin Stora, the Franco-Algerian historian of Algeria, whom Macron tasked some years ago to write a history of the colonial period in Algeria. He told French TV last night that this was unprecedented, the level of crisis. And some of this has to do with other diplomatic issues. France last year decided to recognize Moroccan sovereignty over the disputed territory of Western Sahara, which Algeria rejects. In recent months, a Franco-Algerian dual national was arrested in Algiers, a writer he's become a cause célèbre here in France. So there's a lot happening in the background in terms of the relationship. However, I think political pressures in France, the fact that the far right has pounced on this issue of people remaining on French soil when they have carried out crimes, when they've been designated for deportation, the fact that they're really running with that now as a political issue is also feeding into the fact that Bayrou, the Prime Minister, said that they would review the decades-old agreement that allows Algerians extra leeway in terms of emigrating to France. Yesterday evening, the Algerians responded. They said they reject any threats and ultimatums, and they threatened themselves to impose a reciprocal measure if France indeed decides to change this agreement. And actually, this agreement dates back to 1968, so 6 years after Algeria got its independence.
Mary, when you describe all of that in terms of the tense relationship right now, but also this idea that the far right has, of course, taken the lead in criticizing any migration deals with Algeria, how does the center separate itself from that? Is there something different about how François Bayrou and the Prime Minister and Macron, for that matter, are trying to deal with this? Or are they simply being forced to kind of answer all of these concerns about migration in the same way as the far right is?
Well, I think as we've seen in other European countries in recent years, as the far right has gained political momentum, you see the centre increasingly co-opting some of the talking points of the far right, or discussing immigration more as a result. And certainly that's the case in France. There have been criticisms that the centre-right, and Macron, indeed, and Macron's party have been co-opting some of the rhetoric of the far right on this issue. There's a big debate about that in France, because some people will say that, no, this is not about co-opting the far right. This is actually responding to concerns and grievances on the part of the population. So it's an ongoing debate here, just as it is in other European countries. But, what is not in question here is the fact that the far right have, every time there's an incident that involves a perpetrator who was designated for deportation, for repatriation, the far right really make hay of it, to use an expression, in terms of highlighting the fact that this system is currently not working. And, this is a question, I think, that a lot of other European countries are wrestling with as well, that when people have been designated for repatriation, for deportation, how do you go about implementing that if their country of origin simply refuses to take them back? And that's the case with Algeria.
This is something that many European countries are dealing with, but at the same time, as you have outlined, Algeria and France have a very special relationship here, a history. So with that in mind, how do you expect this particular spat to get resolved? Is there a possibility that at some point Algeria does take in deportees, or what could be the compromise here?
Well, given the current abysmal state of the bilateral relationship, I don't see Algeria agreeing to that anytime soon. It seems on both sides there are attempts to up the ante on this when it comes to the bilateral relationship more generally. So, as I mentioned earlier, it's not simply this question of people that France wants deported to Algeria. There are a lot of other dynamics at play here. And, it's interesting as well, listening to the French discussion in recent days. Those who are very critical of Algeria believe that Algeria is trying to stir the pot, if you like, over the Western Sahara issue. Those who are more critical of France. But it's clear that, this is a relationship that remains very strained. And there are a lot of ghosts, if you like, in terms of the Franco-Algerian relationship, a lot of issues, historical and more contemporary, that simply have not been resolved. So every time this flares, we see all of that kind of mood music in the background.
Mary, just when you describe all of that, frankly, it sounds like both sides are done with this relationship. I mean, what are the incentives for France and Algeria to continue having a special relationship if we can flip this to something more positive?
Well, so in recent months, the far right have been highlighting how much assistance France gives Algeria, monetary and other. They've been highlighting that, calling for that to be cut, presenting Algeria as ungrateful in their rhetoric and that. So, my impression of the bilateral relationship is that, in many ways, France and Algeria are stuck with each other. These are two countries whose histories are so entwined and whose populations are so entwined. France does not collect data on the background of its citizens, ethnic, racial, or otherwise. So we don't know how many people of Algerian heritage live in France. But given the colonial relationship, given the fact that for decades Algerians came to work in France, now you have several generations of that. The fates of the two countries are deeply, deeply entwined. So neither is going anywhere anytime soon. They just have to figure out a way forward together.
Mary Fitzgerald in Marseille, thank you very much for joining us. Still to come in the program.
He knows how vital both the canal and American money and political power and the American alliance is to his country.
We speak with Monocle's Alexis Self about the March issue of Monocle magazine, including an interview with the administrator of the Panama Canal. This is The Globalist.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
You are back with The Globalist, and it's time now to continue with today's newspapers. Joining me in our Zurich studio is Monocle's security correspondent, Gorana Gergic. Good morning to Zurich, Gorana.
Morning, Chris.
We are going to start with, my home nation, one of my home nations. My father's from Austria. And we have some positive news from the country for once. There's a new government.
Indeed, after 5 months of political deadlock, according to multiple now media reports, the news has broken yesterday that Austria's not Australia. This is a Freudian slip on my... No, you said your home country. I'm a national of Australia, so this is the reason. Okay, let's go again. Austria's Conservative People's Party will form a coalition together with the center-left Social Democrats and the Liberal Neos. And this deal came, as I said, after very protracted negotiations, which involved several rounds of actually negotiations between parties in different sort of formations. And it also made the then Chancellor of Austria to basically resign, which again triggered new rounds of talks, and they finally managed to get to a deal which was basically struck now between parties that initially started negotiations, but this collapsed before they managed to get to the final deal.
Gorana, I do have to let you know that I have a T-shirt that says there are no kangaroos in Austria. But before we, moving on from that, just curious what your sense is of this kind of centrist coalition government. We're seeing this in a few different countries, and we'll get to another one in just a moment. But, I mean, is there a feeling that this kind of cooperation between the People's Party, the Social Democrats, the Neos, can it hold?
Well, that is the big question, because, of course, you've already foreshadowed what we might be talking in a little bit on the program. But yeah, indeed, when you have three parties, and if we stick to the sort of just German-speaking regions, we've seen that these types of coalitions are not necessarily all that cohesive all that time, especially when you do have different interests in terms of just the kind of basic ideological questions of, what role for the government, how big it should be, because now there's already talk in these coalition agreements about something called the fiscal consolidation, which is normally a euphemism for cutting government spending, which, of course, the People's Party and Neos might be for, but Social Democrats traditionally tend to be more for sort of larger government spending, for more sort of social spending, especially welfare and similar. And of course, then all of these questions that are burdening a lot of European polities these days, questions of migration, of foreign policy, of course, where they position themselves vis-a-vis Russia's war in Ukraine. Here we are seeing more of the continuity rather than change, but also Austria underlining that it will maintain its long-standing neutrality and that there will be no sort of efforts to overturn that in a manner that we've seen from some other European neutrals like Finland and Sweden over the past couple of years.
Yeah, neutrality is a whole other issue in Austria. But let's move a little bit west from that, because as we were alluding to, Germany has also just had elections, and they are going to be now trying to form a government between the centre-right and the centre-left. But the likely next Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, has been in Paris.
That's true. So just 3 days basically after the German election results became official, the now presumptive sort of next chancellor of Germany traveled to meet with his will-be counterpart, Emmanuel Macron, at the Elysee. And the talk was all about reviving the Franco-German engine that is the foundation of the European Union, obviously at a time when it is all but clear that European Union will be tested in terms of security in a way that it hasn't basically since its foundation. And of course, this is all connected to all the rhetoric, but also some of the early policy moves that are coming out of Washington. So it seems, at least from what we've seen on the photos coming out of this meeting, that the meeting went relatively well. It was quite chummy. The now outgoing German Chancellor Olaf Scholz was said not to have necessarily as warm of a rapport with Macron. So there are a lot of hopes that these two men, the two M's, Macron and Merz, will find a way to work together maybe more effectively because the sort of previous relations maybe weren't as smooth as everyone had hoped for. But of course, there are always these questions and issues on the kind of vision that these two countries as the locomotives of the European Union have for Europe as a whole, and those might not go away immediately. And, you know, again, they are connected with the questions of how deep the integration of Europe should be. I think that these days, of course, again, the kind of crisis moment will probably move the needle, I would say, on the German side, especially given that Friedrich Merz has said that Europe needs to become more sort of self-dependent, more sovereign in that sense. So we will see, of course. And one other thing, I think that there were also some signals about a broader cooperation within the European Union, speaking of the Weimar Triangle, so including Poland in some of these discussions, of course, very important for Ukrainian support and security guarantees. So we'll keep this posted. But also in terms of the optics, it is still a bit weird that we have the outgoing chancellor, which is still Olaf Scholz, not being present in these talks. And of course, Merz seizing the moment and going there to meet Macron.
Not the first time Olaf Scholz has been excluded from a meeting, but just one other story, actually, Gorana, if we could focus on for this. The Oscars are this weekend, and you have some news about Conan O'Brien commenting on whether politics will intrude or not.
Indeed. So the Academy Awards will take place on Sunday, and normally politics is sort of everything these days, right? And of course, if we think about the first Trump administration, the first Oscars that took place after Donald Trump's inauguration in 2017 were notoriously political. And now Conan O'Brien, who will be hosting the show, who has been touted as probably the most apolitical of the late night hosts in the States, said that there might be some mention of politics, but he won't dwell on it. So if you are looking for some drama or barbs towards the present administration, probably not a place to look at least the way that the stories are covering it. But for me, actually, it has been the coverage has been quite interesting to sort of follow and to just remember the 2017 as the awards were going on. There was this whole blunder over awarding La La Land over Moonlight, and then President Trump actually weighing in and saying that Hollywood was so obsessed with him that they even messed up the final award of the night and so on. And then Meryl Streep giving this speech that was basically a sort of rally cry against a Trump administration. It was part of the kind of Women's March kind of movement. and to which Donald Trump tweeted that she's one of the most overrated actresses in Hollywood. So there was a lot of drama, and apparently we should not see the reprise of that. So let's wait and see for Sunday.
We could all use a little bit of distraction, perhaps. Gorana Gergic, thank you very much for joining us from Zurich. Now here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. North Korea's Kim Jong-un has ordered full nuclear readiness for the country after observing the test launch of a strategic cruise missile. That's according to state media. Kim said his nation had now secured the most powerful strike capability and the most perfect deterrence. China has vowed to take all necessary measures against tariffs to be imposed by the Trump administration next week. The announcement comes after Trump said that a 25% tariff on Mexican and Canadian goods will take effect on Tuesday, along with an extra 10% duty on Chinese imports. A U.S. judge has temporarily halted the mass firing of federal workers by the Trump administration, saying the government's Office of Personnel Management lacked the authority to fire employees at other agencies. It is one of several actions by the Trump administration since January that are making their way through the U.S. courts. And the first forecasts are out for Japan's cherry blossom season. Tokyo is expected to get the first look at the pink flowers on the 21st of March, before peak bloom is achieved towards the end of March in eastern and western regions of the country. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. And now for a closer look at one of the stories behind the headlines. Art Basel will be issuing awards for the first time in its history. Here's Monocle's Claudia Jacob.
Art Basel will host its inaugural awards ceremony this May. The commercial art fair has enlisted a jury of 9 directors from institutions such as Sharjah Art Foundation and Hong Kong's M+ Museum, who will announce a total of 36 medalists on the 19th of June. However, artists won't be the only winners. Curators, museums, and lesser celebrated behind-the-scenes professionals, from foundry workers to art handlers, are also in line for prizes. Artists who receive a gold medal in the emerging category will be entered into a tailored mentoring program and given the opportunity to showcase their work at a leading global institution. The awards are a love letter to our global artistic community. Art Basel's Director of Fairs and Exhibition Platforms, Vincenzo De Bellis, tells the Monocle Minute. They will celebrate the people and organisations whose practices or contributions are shaping the future of the contemporary art landscape.
Thank you very much, Claudia Jacob there. This is The Globalist, and now for a look behind the pages of Monocle's March magazine, just out this week. We're joined by Monocle's foreign editor, Alexis Self, right here in the studio. Hello, Lex.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me.
You've leaned, I have to say, when I look at this issue and some of the sort of the stories in the affairs section in the early days, you kind of leaned into the geopolitical tensions of the moment, but with maybe a sideways glance at them, which is, I think, interesting and frankly what Monocle always tries to do. Let's start with the Panama Canal, because it's a particularly interesting story.
Yes, thank you, Chris. And you've done my job in the past, so that's...
I know it well.
That's a high compliment coming from you, and I appreciate it. Yes, so we actually had a choice in this issue. We had 2 interviews. One was with the Serbian foreign minister, and just a bit of insight to what goes on with a monthly magazine is that there were large-scale protests against the government in Belgrade. The prime minister resigned. The foreign minister, who's a close ally of Vučić, the president, his job perhaps wasn't the most secure. We didn't know what was going to happen. We were talking to Belgrade. We decided maybe we'd wait on that one. And at the same time, we had this great interview, or opportunity to interview, the administrator of the Panama Canal Authority. Now, as you said, the big story, certainly following President Trump's inauguration speech, in which he vowed to take back the Panama Canal, which had been... Among
other places, but Panama Canal was a particular focus.
Yes, and unusual perhaps to have this small Central American country in the news and leading the news alongside places like Greenland, for example. The Panama Canal, which was built by the Americans, by the US state, and owned by the US state until 1999. After which it was ceded to Panama. So we had this opportunity to interview the Panama Canal Authority chairman, the administrator of the canal, the man who runs it, who's actually been Panama's finance minister twice. And yes, it's a look at this incredibly important trade route. I think 5% of global trade goes through the Panama Canal. That's actually down from what it used to be, but it's still incredibly important, and it represents kind of human ingenuity and the ability of trade to kind of literally move the earth and connect the two big oceans, or biggest oceans on the planet. So we spoke to Ricaute Vasquez, who is the administrator of the Panama Canal Authority at the Panama Canal Authority's headquarters, which is, again, built by the Americans, looks out on the Panama Canal, and it looks like it's got that classic neoclassical American take on authority, on kind of administration. So it looks like a Washington, D.C. administrative building with a rotunda and everything.
Which is what makes all of this so interesting, isn't it? Because of those US links. And yet, I'm assuming when you speak to someone like the administrator, they also are showing their own sort of fierce independence when it comes to managing this thing.
Yes, and a very interesting man he is, and lots of experience in government and with economics, and he knows how vital both the canal and American money and political power and the American alliance is to his country. So he's diplomatic. He concedes that Trump might have a point about, for example, corruption, Chinese influence on the canal, but he also talks a lot about innovation that they're undergoing there, that they're trying to resist both the kind of dwindling economic importance of the canal as other trade routes open up, but also the effects of climate change and how they're going to combat that. There was a devastating drought in the canal. I think it was last year, it might have been 2023, where it dried up. And they're coming up with solutions for that involve, or at least as he puts it, actually planting trees and rewilding and not taking away from nature, because as he puts it, the reason that nature kind of bit back in that way was because it was being exploited. So it's a really interesting interview, and as you said at the beginning, a kind of sideways look at this big story and global issue, but a bit more thought out and come at from a different angle, laterally, if you will, across the bodies of water. So yeah, it's really, really interesting, and very, very pleased to have it in the magazine.
And Lex, just before we let you go, you have also been doing a lot of work, I think, on multilateralism and soft power. That's something that we focus on. I know Simon Bouvier also wrote a story here about nuclear fusion. We have spoken to him about it as well. I was just curious about your take on this story and kind of this idea of all these countries coming together, even in a time as difficult as this. You have Chinese, Russian, American, European scientists, and you have other stories I know you're working on when it comes to this sort of multilateralism still existing in different forms.
Well, I would urge anyone to listen to Simon speak about nuclear fusion. He was there. He went to this, I mean, it looks just unbelievably massive turbine hall in Provence, just outside Aix-en-Provence in the south of France, where they are attempting to harness energy similar magnitude, I think 6 times the heat of the surface of the sun, using nuclear fusion, which many scientists believe could be a kind of panacea for, our climate-related ills, to connect what I was just talking about, in that it creates such huge amounts of energy for relatively small kind of input, and it doesn't produce carbon emissions. And yeah, as you said, it's somewhere, ITER, which is this multilateral organization, which was actually the brainchild of Mikhail Gorbachev, and who proposed it to Ronald Reagan during, the kind of rapprochement between the Soviet Union and the United States in the late 1980s. So that's where it begins, and that's, those are the seeds of perhaps the golden age of multilateralism, which is coming to an end, I feel, but that existed after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union. Yeah, it's something that we're always interested in here, and how kind of countries can work together while retaining their own distinct identities and kind of celebrating them, but also, coming together to do something truly inspirational, which I do believe this ITER is, and which we're always on the lookout for.
Alexis Self, Monocle's foreign editor, thank you very much for joining us. You're with Monocle Radio. It is coming up on 1640 in Tokyo and 740 here in London. The Shinkansen bullet trains in Japan are famous around the world as a speedy passenger option that many of us frankly wish we had in our own countries. Well, now we can be jealous not just about the passenger trains, but cargo, because the first ever cargo bullet train has now been launched. And here to tell us all about it is Ryo Takagi, a professor in the Department of Electrical and Electronic Engineering at Kokakuin University in Tokyo. Ryo, I understand you also have your own show about trains, which makes you a perfect guest for this segment for us. Tell us about this cargo-only bullet train. What's it like?
Well, it is the one train set refurbished for cargo operation only. And it used to be a train set for passenger service, and now converted to fit for the service.
And what kind of cargo will be transported on this? Why does it matter in that sense?
Well, actually, the similar service has been there in Japan for at least 40 years or so. But the amount of cargo that can be transported was pretty limited, because the service used to use the spare space on a normal service train, passenger train, I mean. So the amount was limited. And now, during the pandemic, the company operator, JR East, saw a very significant drop in the number of passengers, and they wanted to do almost everything to make up for the lost revenue. And one of them was actually this cargo on the Shinkansen type of trains. And one example they have tried was the fresh fish, which will be transported from somewhere outside of Tokyo area to Central Station, and where they run a restaurant within the station premises. So they can quickly take out the fresh fish from the train, bring it along the path within the station premises, and go to the restaurant, and then immediately cook and serve the passengers there. So that was successful, and they decided that there may be other people who want to use this kind of service. So they wanted to expand the service now using that train set. So it's basically something that will compete with the aviation cargo services.
Yes, absolutely. And Ryo, you've laid out some of the explanation for why JR East is perhaps doing this now, taking advantage of a fall in passenger numbers. But tell us if there are any challenging aspects of operating a cargo-only Shinkansen as well.
Well, actually, the reason why the service was there for nearly 4 decades is there's a certain amount of need for it. It's certainly faster than in any other modes of transport, so that was good. But having said that, the collection point of cargo was actually at one of the stations within the city center, and And the pickup point on the other end is also in the city center, which is actually not necessarily convenient for transporting large amount of cargo, which is pretty different from the situation for the aviation cargo, because airport is actually located outside of the city center. And so it's easy to add the facility for handling cargo at the airport. But that's not the case with the railway station. The amount of land is limited and all those sorts of things. So the success depends on how you can actually advertise people who want to transport goods at high speed with a very high price, which justifies the service.
And it is interesting the way you lay this out. I mean, perhaps something like perishables, fresh fish are the examples that work the best for this. But just tell us if you expect that this will be a success, I suppose, in that sense. Is this a model that could be used for logistics going forward, whether that's in Japan or elsewhere?
Well, that actually is a difficult question, because we know a number of failed cases in other countries like Italy, now the test is going on in China as far as I understand it. So we might be seeing the new domain that railway can handle, because there are three domains that railways were successful. One was the slow freight trains handling bulky and large amount of goods. And the second one is the urban passenger transport, like metros or trams. And then the third one is the high-speed intercity passenger transport. So we might be seeing the fourth one, which is the high-speed cargo transport, which competes with the airline industry handling cargo. So if that happens, that's a very big change. So we are waiting to see what happens in the future. Actually, I can't predict at this moment whether this is successful or not.
We will see what happens, but interesting nonetheless. Ryo Takagi, thank you very much for joining us from Tokyo. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
You are back with The Globalist, and it's time now to talk trade and economy news with Vicky Price, economist and former joint head of the UK government's economic service. Vicky, you're coming on at once again a moment with a lot of tariff news out of the United States. Mixed bag, positive and negative. Let's perhaps start with the positive after the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer visited yesterday.
Well, yes. Well, of course, it's what was said, which needs to probably be differentiated from what happens in practice. So President Trump seemed to be quite open to the possibility of having a trade deal, not a very big trade deal, but one in particular sectors is what we understand, in exchange for not having possibly tariffs imposed on the UK, whereas he wants to impose lots of tariffs on everyone else. As far as we can see, he's already, of course, announced an extra 10% for Chinese imports into the US. He's threatening the EU as well with tariffs, and they're going to be hearing about that soon. Canada and Mexico will have, supposedly, from what we hear, those tariffs, the 25% tariffs imposed on them as of March the 4th. even though they seem to have done quite a lot to meet some of his demands, particularly in terms of both migrants and also drugs sort of moving through the borders. But let's see what happens with that. But in the UK seem to be quite satisfied with what they got, even though it was only, small comfort in a way, because on the political side, it doesn't look like Prime Minister Cermak got an awful lot out of President Trump on Ukraine, but nevertheless on the trade side, certainly various trade bodies, including the British Chambers of Commerce, are coming out saying this all sounds pretty good, it's encouraging, it means we can try to work hard with both the EU and the US, although of course the EU may have tariffs and who knows what that will mean. So good news from that point of view, but what does it mean for particular sectors? What we do know is that nobody wants to have chlorinated chickens coming into either the UK or Europe, and there are issues about pharmaceutical prices, what export prices might mean for the US when it sells things into the National Health Service here, so all those things are possibly out of the agenda, but it could be more on tech and AI. And there, of course, it's the US firms that hold all the cards. So one wonders really what the main benefit for the UK would be, perhaps more investment, but big concessions probably will have to be given. So the details will need to be sorted out. So good news in a way, but you never know with President Trump, and also, what actually will happen in practice. It will take a little bit of time to sort this stuff out.
Vicky, just a quick question to end on. If we look a little bit east of that, the European Union facing possible tariffs. Tell us about particularly the car makers and how they might be most affected.
Yes, well, the interesting thing is, of course, that the EU has been pretty strong saying that if there are tariffs imposed on us, what President Trump has said is that there are tariffs of 10% being charged on US cars coming here, whereas they only charge 2.5% for cars going into the US, which means that there has to be some rethink of all that. So the car makers are not doing well. Their shares are not doing well. They are very concerned because, of course, the US has been a big market for them. So it is causing, quite a lot of concern, and how it will be sorted out, that is seriously unclear. And also, of course, if the UK is outside that, where does it stand? Because supply chains are so important between the UK and Europe and wider, really. So it is a big issue, and a big issue of concern.
The economist Vicky Pryce, thank you very much for joining us. You are listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
The wait is over. Monocle's flagship leadership conference, The Chiefs, is coming to Jakarta. Join us on Wednesday the 24th and Thursday the 25th of April for an exclusive high-impact gathering of the world's most influential business minds. Join Tyler Boulay, Andrew Tuck and Monocle's editors at 25 Hours Hotel The Odd Bird for valuable industry forecasts and practical advice on how to steer your business. Don't delay. Secure your ticket at monocle.com/events now. Or email Hannah Grundy on hg@monocle.com for further information. The Chiefs Global Leadership Conference in Jakarta. We'll see you there.
And finally, for today's show, it is time for that weekly look at what else is happening in the news with Andrew Mueller's What We Learned.
We learned this week of exciting new career prospects for the grievously oppressed and disregarded demographic, that is, cranky middle-aged white guys with podcasts. For we learned that the new deputy director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation is this guy.
Why does everybody want to fight me all the time? Do I have a punchable face or something?
This guy being specifically host of the Dan Bongino show, Dan Bongino. We learned from a brief survey of his CV that while Bongino has been, in fairness, a New York City police officer and a Secret Service agent, he has no experience at all whatsoever of the organisation of which he is now second in command. So on balance, it's reassuring that the ultimate responsibility for the FBI is now in the steady, capable hands of...
We will go out and find the conspirators, not just in government, but in the media. Yes, we're going to come after the people in the media who lied about American citizens, who helped Joe Biden rig presidential elections.
America. It was fun while it lasted. On which subject we learned more of US President Donald Trump's sane, plausible and above all extremely normal vision for post-war Gaza, and we learned this from a video the actual President of the United Actual States posted on his own account on his own platform.
Donald is coming to set you free, bringing the light for all to see. No more tunnels, no more fear. Trump Gaza is finally here.
We are honestly uncertain whether we can, in all good conscience, recommend that listeners look up the accompanying AI-generated animation of the Mediterranean resort of Trump's fevered imaginings, but we are able to confirm that it includes such vignettes as...
A brand new life. Feast and dance, the deal is done. Trump Gaza, number one.
Bearded bikini-clad belly dancers, children dancing in showers of banknotes, a grateful urchin flying a gold balloon in the shape of Trump's head, though the balloon possibly contains more, a huge gold statue of Trump and racks of smaller souvenirs of the huge gold statue, a shirtless Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu lounging on deck chairs, and someone who looks very like Elon Musk eating hummus. We are continuing to learn, basically, that satirizing current American politics has become pretty much a matter of merely reciting what actually happens, and sticking with that theme. We learned that it was, again, that glorious time of year at which compilers of whimsical weekly news reviews can put their feet up, while the annual Dingbat Rodeo, which trades as the Conservative Political Action Conference, pretty much writes it all for us.
Oh, no.
We learned, first of all, of the calibre of overseas guest that this forum is able to attract. No less a keynote speaker than Liz Truss.
No, Liz who?
No, doesn't ring any bells.
Elizabeth, maybe?
What's
your bugs fizz?
That's showbiz. We learned from the UK's shortest serving and yet not serving nearly shortly enough Prime Minister that she, for one, and very possibly for only, had seen something she'd like to bring back home. Although if we had access to a lifelong taxpayer-funded expense account of up to 115 grand a year on the basis of 7 weeks service, we'd be a bit circumspect about encouraging ruthless purges of unnecessary state spending. Still, we learned from CPAC of the imminent rescue of possibly the only cohort of people more brutally downtrodden than cranky middle-aged white guys with podcasts, i.e. younger white guys who like to tell jokes and drink beer with their friends. And we learned this from Vice President J.D. Vance, who was totally telling jokes and drinking beer with his very, very many friends, which he definitely has, both before and after making this important intervention.
My message to young men is don't allow this broken culture to send you a message that you're a bad person because you're a man, because you like to tell a joke, because you like to have a beer with your friends.
We shall overcome, Mr. Vice President. We shall. But what we mostly gleaned from CPAC was further insight into the thinking of the person who is increasingly obviously actually running the United States, i.e. hopefully first man on Mars sooner rather than later Elon Musk, and let's hear it if you're old enough to remember when the Republican Party was just furious about the idea of a foreign-born billionaire influencing American politics when they thought it was George Soros. We learned from Musk, as he wore a baseball cap and sunglasses indoors, as serious and sober adults so very often do, that...
But you know, it was essentially to buy freedom of expression.
But we learned that Musk may have been distracted, certainly if he gets push alerts on his phone. For we learned that he had caused an email to be sent to hundreds of thousands of federal government employees demanding to know in bullet point form what they did last week. So we learned, or at least very much hope to learn, that whatever Elon Musk has or has not accomplished this week, or indeed does or does not accomplish with his time on this planet, he has surely set an all-time world record for receiving the most emails consisting of the words, "Your mum." For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Mueller.
Andrew Mueller, thank you. And that's all for today's program. Thanks to our producers, Laura Kramer, Ryuma Takahashi, and Hassan Anderson. Our researcher, Maisie Ringer. Our studio manager, Elliot Greenfield, with editing assistance from Mariella Bevan. After the headlines, there is more music on the way. The Briefing is live with Emma Nelson at midday in London. The Globalist returns at the same time on Monday. I'm Chris Cermak. Have a great weekend, and thank you for tuning in.